The first time David noticed the dog, it was almost by accident. Morning traffic along the river road was a blur of taillights and impatience, commuters rushing toward a life that felt far away from his own. He had been walking along the cracked pavement, coffee cooling in his hand, when a flicker of movement pulled his eyes toward the rust-stained underbelly of the old iron bridge. At first, he thought it was nothing, maybe the ripple of water below, maybe a scrap of wind-blown fabric clinging to the stone foundation. But then, the figure shifted, and David froze. Two golden eyes glinted from the shadows, unblinking, fixed. For a moment, they looked less like eyes and more like tiny lanterns lit in the dark, fragile but fiercely alive. It was a German shepherd, thin, rib bones sharp as fence posts, fur mottled with dirt and rain. His body was pressed low to the ground, every muscle tensed as if bracing against an invisible strike. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark. He only stared, unmoving, as if daring the world to get too close. David felt the air shift inside him. He had always been the kind of man who noticed the small things, the way leaves curled in the first frost, the faint tremor in his mother's hands when she had grown sick, the unspoken sadness in a friend's silence. And now he noticed the fear. It wasn't just a dog hiding under a bridge. It was a soul barricaded in shadow, waiting for something, or maybe waiting for nothing at all. He wanted to step closer, but even from this distance he saw the shepherd's body stiffen, saw his paws flex against the cold stone. The message was clear: don't come near me. Cars rolled overhead, shaking the bridge with metallic groans. The smell of river water rose damp and earthy, mixed with the faint tang of rust. David stayed still, heart beating slower now, like he'd been pulled into another world, the dog's world. The spell broke when a horn blared behind him. A delivery truck veered too close to the shoulder, the driver shouting something into the wind. David stepped back instinctively, but when he looked again, the shepherd was gone. Just shadows under the bridge, deep and indifferent. Still, he couldn't shake it. That look, those eyes. The next morning, he found himself walking the same path again. Part of him told himself it was coincidence, that he just liked the air by the river, that his feet had simply taken him here. But another part knew better. He slowed as he reached the bridge, scanning the stonework and weeds. There he was. The shepherd crouched lower this time, half hidden behind a pile of debris, an old tire, a plastic bag tangled in reeds. His fur was damp, clinging to his frame. His ears flicked at every sound. David crouched too, keeping his distance, trying not to look threatening. He pulled the crust of bread from his pocket. He had brought it without admitting to himself why, and set it gently on the ground. Then he retreated, step by careful step, until he was 20 feet away. For minutes, nothing moved. Then, like a ghost unraveling from the dark, the shepherd crept forward. His body was low, tail tucked tight, paws silent as river mist. He sniffed the bread, but didn't eat it. Instead, he took it delicately in his mouth and carried it back to the shadows, as if afraid even food had to be hidden. David swallowed hard. He had seen stray dogs before, but something about this one felt different. This was not an animal wandering alleys or digging through trash. This was an animal in exile. Days turned into a pattern. Each morning David returned, bringing something small, bits of chicken, a slice of apple, sometimes only a handful of kibble that he had picked up at the corner store. He never pushed, never rushed. Always he left the offering and walked away. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shepherd began to trust the space between them. The first time he ate in the open, David nearly cried. It was raining that day, the river swollen and angry, raindrops slashing against the concrete. The shepherd stepped out from his shadow den, muzzle dripping, and chewed hungrily with his eyes still locked on David, as if daring him to betray him even now. David whispered into the storm, his words half carried by the wind. "You're not alone. Not anymore." But the dog didn't know that yet. Then came the night that changed everything. David couldn't sleep. The rain had not stopped, and the river had risen higher than he had seen in years. He tossed in bed, the sound of the storm pounding against his window, and all he could think of was that fragile body under the bridge, water pressing closer, shadows closing in. By midnight, he was back on the river road, flashlight in hand, soaked through within seconds. The bridge loomed above him like a skeleton of iron, groaning under the storm's weight. He scrambled down the embankment, boots sliding in mud. The water was already licking at the stone base where the shepherd usually lay. "Where are you?" David shouted over the roar of the river, voice raw, desperate. Then, eyes. Shining back at him from higher up on the ledge, wide and frantic. The shepherd was there, trembling, paws slipping against wet stone. David's chest tightened. If the water kept rising, the ledge would vanish. He edged closer, mud sucking at his boots. The shepherd barked for the first time, a sharp, panicked sound that echoed off the bridge. David froze, not wanting to spook him into falling. His flashlight trembled in his hand, beam darting across stone and water. "It's okay," he said, his voice breaking. "I see you. I'm not leaving." For a heartbeat, everything was sound. The crash of water, the grinding of iron, the pounding of David's pulse. The shepherd's claws scraped against rock, desperate to hold on. Then, a chunk of debris slammed into the bridge, sending a spray of water over both of them. The shepherd flinched backward, paws scrambling dangerously close to the edge. "Don't!" David lunged forward without thinking. And in that suspended second, everything balanced on a knife's edge. A man, a dog, a storm, a choice. That was how it began. Not with triumph, not with rescue, but with the raw terror of losing something before you even truly had it. And as David stood in the rain, arm outstretched, eyes locked with the shepherd's, he knew this was no ordinary moment. This was the beginning of a fight for survival. And the night was far from over.
Rain hammered the bridge like 1,000 fists, every drop heavy, relentless, cold enough to sting the skin. David's outstretched hand shook, half from fear and half from the current of adrenaline flooding his body. The shepherd's eyes glowed pale gold in the beam of his flashlight, wide and unblinking, pupils pinched to pinpricks in the glare. For a moment, the animal froze, claws skittering against the slick stone. Behind him, the river surged and roared, a monstrous wall of water eager to swallow anything it could reach. The ledge where the shepherd stood was narrowing with every passing second, foam licking at its edges. "Come on," David whispered, his voice drowned by thunder. "I've got you." The shepherd didn't move. His body crouched lower, ears flattened, breath heaving out in short, panicked bursts. A flash of lightning lit his fur, matted with rain, rib bones jutting like the frame of a broken kite. He looked less like a proud German shepherd and more like a ghost clinging to its last anchor. Another crash echoed as debris slammed against the bridge, a floating branch, maybe part of someone's fence torn loose by the storm. The noise startled the shepherd into jerking backward, his hind paw slipping into the icy water. His bark split the air, raw and terrified. "No!" David lunged forward, boots sliding in mud, hands grasping at empty air. For one awful second, the shepherd dangled, front paws clawing at stone, back legs thrashing helplessly in the torrent. Water slammed against his body, dragging at him like greedy hands. David dropped the flashlight, its beam tumbling across the embankment, casting wild arcs of light and shadow. He threw himself flat, chest scraping against cold rock, rain blinding him. One arm shot out, fingers reaching. "Take it, please!" By some miracle, the shepherd lunged upward, snapping his jaws not at his hand, but at his sleeve, teeth catching fabric. Pain tore through David's arm as the cloth bit into his skin, but he didn't let go. With every ounce of strength he pulled, boots digging into the mud, shoulders screaming. The shepherd scrambled, claws gouging grooves into stone. Then, with a final desperate kick, his body landed beside David in a heap of soaked fur and trembling bones. They lay there together, gasping, the storm shrieking around them. For a long time, neither moved. David turned his head slowly. The shepherd was curled tight, chest heaving, eyes wide with the raw shock of survival. His teeth were still locked onto David's sleeve, as if afraid letting go would mean falling back into the dark. "It's okay," David murmured, his voice raw. "You're safe now. I've got you." The shepherd's jaws loosened, the fabric slipping from his mouth. He didn't move closer, but he didn't bolt either. His entire body trembled like a wire pulled taut. And for the first time, David reached out, not to grab, not to restrain, but to simply rest his hand gently on the cold, wet ground between them. No closer than that. A silent offering. The shepherd's eyes flicked to it, uncertain, then back to David, then back to the river, still clawing at the ledge where he had nearly been lost. They stayed like that until the storm began to ease, the rain softening from furious sheets to weary drops, thunder rolling farther away. By the time David managed to coax the shepherd up the embankment, dawn had begun to bleed pale light across the river. The dog moved hesitantly, every step measured as though expecting betrayal at any moment. David kept his distance, letting the shepherd climb ahead of him, guiding with quiet words instead of hands. At the roadside, his car waited, headlights glowing faintly through mist. He had left the back door cracked open. The space inside looked impossibly warm compared to the river's edge. "Come on," David urged softly. "It's dry. You'll be okay." The shepherd stood a few feet away, body soaked, tail low, eyes wary. His paws bled from scraping stone, crimson mixing with mud. He tilted his head at the open door, ears twitching, nose flaring at the scent of cloth seats and stale coffee. For a heartbeat, hope surged in David's chest. Maybe he would climb in. Maybe he would choose safety. But then, with a sudden jolt, the shepherd bolted. Not into the road, not into the river, but back toward the embankment, slipping into the brush like a phantom. David's breath left him in a broken sound. He stumbled after him, but the dog was already gone, swallowed by the wild tangle of reeds and shadow. The empty road stretched silent around him. The car sat waiting. The open door looked foolish now. And David stood alone in the thinning rain, sleeves torn, hands bleeding, the echo of golden eyes seared into his mind. That morning, he drove home in silence, mud streaked across his seats, rainwater dripping down his collar. Every few minutes, he glanced at the empty space in the back seat, his throat tightening with what should have been there. At home, he searched himself for logic. Maybe it was better this way. The dog had survived. He had gotten out of the flood. Maybe he belonged to the wild, to his shadows under the bridge. But when David tried to close his eyes, all he saw was the shepherd's paw slipping, his body dragged by the river, the desperate bite at his sleeve. That wasn't a wild animal. That was a soul asking, "Just hold on to me. Don't let go." And David hadn't let go. Not then. Not now. The next day, he returned to the bridge. The river had calmed, though driftwood and trash still clung to the banks, evidence of the storm's violence. The ledge where the shepherd once lay was gone, swallowed whole. David's heart clenched. If he hadn't come last night, if he had hesitated. He shook the thought away. He scanned the brush, ears straining for any sound. For hours he lingered, leaving food in careful spots, calling softly into the silence. Nothing. But as he turned to leave, a shape flickered in his corner of vision. Far back in the trees, barely visible, stood the shepherd, still, watching. David froze. Slowly, he set down the bag of food. He didn't move closer. He didn't even speak. He only nodded once, a silent promise. "I'll keep coming back. I won't give up on you." The shepherd's tail flicked once, almost imperceptible. Then he melted into shadow. That night, David couldn't help but search online, forums, rescue groups, veterinary sites. He read about feral dogs, about the slow process of trust, about patience measured not in days, but in months. He learned how fear could harden into walls thicker than concrete, how survival instincts made even kindness look like danger. But he also read stories of breakthroughs, of the moment a hand was finally touched, a leash accepted, a home found. Every story sounded impossible, until suddenly, it wasn't. And somewhere inside him, David knew this was only the beginning. The shepherd had survived the river, but the fight for his life, for his trust, his healing, his place in the world, had only just begun. And David was not about to let him fight it alone.